Good morning, Warsaw. Today is Wednesday, 23rd August. It will be cloudy in the morning with sunny spells in the afternoon, with highs of 19 degrees Celsius or 66 degrees Fahrenheit for our American listeners. Sunrise will be at 5:48 a.m. and sunset at 8:01 p.m. We are on the 23rd day of the Warsaw Uprising, and there are three attacks happening simultaneously with successes and losses at the same time. But Alina and Roger will tell us about that later. Otherwise, what else is happening?
Well, you know me, Philippe. I am full of the unexpected, so I've decided that I am going to do this now because these are three places that I usually take people when I go and do tour guiding, and that is to Krakowskie Przedmieście. Now, why are these 3 points really important? Well, we stand outside the Blue Police headquarters, the Church of the Holy Cross, and then later on we go down to the Warsaw University. These are the 3 points that are under attack at the same time on this day. Now, I'll start with the first, then we'll move on to the second, and then I will talk on the University of Warsaw. So we'll start with the Blue Police headquarters. During the occupation, the building was where the Blue Police were the Polish police of the general government who operated during the German occupation. They were subordinate to the German police, and they were recruited from usually former police officers during the interwar period, and they participated in various different actions, for example, combating the black market, isolating Jews in the ghettos, and there were quite a few that belonged to the Home Army who passed on information about the activities of other Germans. But that's not the point of what we're here for. We're here to talk about what happened during the Warsaw Uprising, and the Blue Police headquarters was located at number 1 Krakowskie Przedmieście. And on August the 1st, the Poles didn't attack the building because the problem being with this area, that it was very heavily fortified. Now, the Church of the Holy Cross had snipers up in the tower. There was a bunker across the road right next to the statue of Mikołaj Kopernik, or how some people may know him as a Copernicus, who, yes, he was Polish, not German. This area threatened the outposts in the area of Świętokrzyska, which is the road below it, and Nowy Świat or Nowy World Street, which again is a bit further south, and it caused problems with the communication of the district in Powiśle down by the river. The next issue that the insurgents had to overcome was a 3-metre high wall that surrounded the command area from the other side, so parallel side to Krakowskie Przedmieście. Now, they didn't attack it in the first few days, but this just became more problematic by the 23rd of August. So, at 3:30 a.m, this was a big pronged attack of multiple insurgents, multiple battalions, and the insurgent units begin to attack at the time. The Polish units who attacked the Blue Police station and the church divided into 3 groups. There was about 280 of them, and then approximately 50 other soldiers joined from other units to help. So over 300 people were fighting for this area. So this operation lasted, well, various sources say, between 6 to 9 hours, and it was a very successful action. So how did it go? They blew up the back wall, which separated the church and a school which was located in the area. And then they also blew up an entrance into the church, and the soldiers broke in, and that's where the soldiers entered. There was a fierce fight with the Germans who were inside the church and held positions in the upper galleries, but the soldiers quickly managed to take this over and force their way into the police headquarters. The enemy losses amounted to about several dozen, and about 100 Germans were taken prisoner. The insurgents captured a lot of weapons, ammunition, uniform, and freed Poles, including several dozen blue policemen who were held in the basement. These people were being held as hostages. There was large supplies of food that were also found, but on the Polish side, several soldiers died, and this caused the insurgent defence line to be moved towards Krakowskie Przedmieście. It was a very favourable position for the soldiers. It allowed them to carry on to the next attack of the nearby University of Warsaw. And because it was such a successful mission, it was just like a couple of days ago when we talked about the Pasta building. It raised the morale of the insurgents, the civilians, and it just went through insurgent press like wildfire. However, I talked about a 3-pronged attack. We just talked about the Blue Police headquarters, and we talked about the Church of the Holy Cross. Now, the third point was supposed to be the attempt for the university. And this also started at about 3 o'clock in the morning. And 150 soldiers from the Kudowa Battalion took their positions to attack the University of Warsaw. So they was attacking from the south, from the bottom, and another battalion was supposed to be attacking from the northern part, from Krakowskie Przedmieście. This doesn't happen. The other thing I wanted to add before we move on is why was the university so strategic? Why the insurgents needed to capture it is because of two main reasons. One, there was a Nebelwerfer in the middle of the university that was firing upon the old town, and they had to eliminate that. That's probably one of the most crucial points. Number two, the university was closed during the occupation, but it was used as a storage for weaponry, food, and various different uniforms that the insurgents could have used, and that is something that they needed to capture to help them, obviously, with their lack of weapons and lack of ammunition. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to allow Janusz Paszyński to tell you all about this. Just a side note, Janusz Paszyński was one of my closest confidants, one of my favourite insurgents. I loved this man till the day he died in 2020, just as COVID hit. And I'm so glad I'm able to get his words published here on our podcast. So have a listen to Janusz Paszyński.
The second attempt to take over the university took place on the 23rd of August. We made it almost to the university itself, from the direction of Powiśle, and there we lay at night right at the foot of a steeply rising slope. We were so close to the German positions that we could hear the Germans talking upstairs, and the Germans might have heard us too. Our task was to attack the German positions from below, but it was intended as a relief measure because the main attack was to come from Krakowskie Przedmieście. And there, at dawn, an attack began, supported by two Polish armored vehicles, Kubuś, built in Powiśle, and Jaś, our second armored vehicle, which had been captured on Kopernika Street a few days earlier. The troops of the 8th Group, under the command of Cadet Grey Wilk, attended the university through the main gate, the one on Krakowskie Przedmieście, took out the concrete bunker that the Germans had built there shortly before the outbreak of the uprising, and reached the square in front of the old university library. Our task was to simultaneously attack the university from below. We were waiting for a signal in the form of a rocket that was supposed to be fired up there. It was supposed to be a signal for the troops of the 3rd Group to attack from below. But the rocket was not fired. We lay there and waited for the order to attack. And it's probably a good thing that it happened, because the attack on the university from below had virtually no chance of success. The Germans had positioned heavy machine guns, grenade launchers, and mortars there. They could hit the attackers with grenades thrown from above, so that of those who would take part in such an attack, only a few would survive. Initially, the assault was successful, but unfortunately, the fire from German machine guns, grenade launchers, and anti-tank guns quickly intensified. The crews of the insurgent combat vehicles feared being surrounded by the enemy, so they took the wounded, and around 4:50 a.m., under fire from the Germans, they withdrew deeper into their positions. In the morning, the last insurgents returned to their quarters. The attempt to take the University of Warsaw failed. Almost immediately, preparations for another attack on the university began. 250 insurgents were to take part in the attack. The armored vehicles that were intended to be used this time also underwent some modifications.
That was such a great testimony from Janusz. Absolutely, just a fabulous human being. So I've spoken about what's happening here on the ground, the 2 successes and the 1 failure. What is happening in the air? We haven't spoken much about airdrops or anything like that. So Claire, tell us what's happening there.
Well, there is an unexpected success for the Poles, which is quite a morale boost. Because around midday, they managed to shoot down a German Junker Ju-87. So that is the Stuka dive bomber. So this is the machine that's synonymous with the Blitzkrieg, okay? It comes screaming down at about 80 degrees. I mean, that's pretty much near vertical. And they used to have, during the Blitzkrieg at the start of the war, they'd have whistles attached to the wheels So they would absolutely terrify people. But they are not an entirely perfect machine. They're a brilliant machine. But one of their slight faults, I think, or weaknesses, is that as they come screaming, herring down, once they've decided, I mean, they point their entire plane nose down in the direction that they're going to release their bombs. So it's precision bombing, if you like, very targeted bombing, which has lots of advantages. But once they are committed to a dive, it's quite clear what their trajectory is going to be, which gives them a weakness or a vulnerability. And on this occasion, the Poles, and we don't know exactly how they did it. It was either a light machine gunner or one of the machine guns taken down from a Lancaster that had been shot down previously in the Old Town. But they managed to shoot one of these aircraft down. And there is a bit of a description of it. So apparently this Stuka was one of 4 that was flying over the Old Town at about midday. And despite the fact that the Poles were trying to conserve the amount of bullets they were using, they had been told not to waste their machine guns on these aircraft. As the Stuka flew down in a dive position, it was met by defensive machine gun fire from 2 different positions. And it got away from the first. It was soon out of range from the light machine gun, but flew straight into the sight of Officer Cadet Mutz, who is usually credited with bringing this aircraft down. He aimed continuous fire at the front of the Stuka's fuselage and hit the engine's radiator. Apparently, the machine gun was straining in his hands until he screamed out, "I've got him," by which point I think the machine gunner himself was about half conscious. And they saw a wisp of smoke coming out of the back of the Stuka's fuselage, and they watched as the pilot tried to straighten out and fly back towards the roofs, but his engine choked up and it suddenly seemed to stop in midair and shudder, and it swayed to one side and crashed into some of the high rooftops nearby. And as it crashed down into the buildings, its wings were sliced off and the crushed fuselage fell into the streets below in the part of the partisan-held area near where the machine gunners were. And there was a huge column of black smoke, and later they found the bodies of the pilots, which had been thrown out, with some force several meters away. They were described as crumpled figures, shapeless like bags. And quickly, as the fuel spilled out over the streets, it was ignited and there was a burning barrier around the crash. But this is one of the few times we have a really strong description of an enemy aircraft, a Stuka dive bomber, being brought down by defensive machine gun fire on the ground. So quite a morale boost for the insurgents. Roger, you've been brilliant keeping us up to date with what's going on in Moscow and the relations between Britain and America, the positions of Churchill and Roosevelt on deliveries. What's happening now from Moscow?
Well, it's a sort of standard practice, the Moscow method, if you like, of essentially of taking over neighbouring countries was to very often create sort of councils of cat's paws of compliant individuals from those countries, fellow travellers, who would then sort of set up some sort of organisation with a rather anodyne name. And they would then serve as the core of your sort of takeover operation. And as you'll remember...
So these are Polish communists?
Yeah, so this is the organisation of Polish communists is established in the middle of the war. It's called the Union of Polish Patriots. So again, very sort of anodyne. Nobody could argue with the Union of Polish Patriots, surely. That's set up in Moscow. It's basically, it's a vehicle, it's a mouthpiece for Kremlin policy. It's run by Poles, but Polish communists. The most famous being Bolesław Bierut, who later was, effectively the Polish Stalin post-war. So run by Polish communists, they are completely the cat's paws of the Kremlin. And they are lending their shoulder to the wheel to put pressure on the underground, to criticise the underground for the rising, and to reiterate that Kremlin position, which is this is a criminal operation that we will not be supporting. So there's a broadcast by this Union of Polish Patriots on the 23rd of August. The headline is, it says, "Warsaw has fallen victim to a fraud," which is sort of rather tough words. And then goes on to criticise the underground for not having open channels of communication with the Red Army, which of course, as we know, was not true. And it says that the Rising has only one goal in mind, which is to spoil and irritate Polish-Soviet relations. So they're really, on the one hand, they're echoing that Kremlin's position, bolstering the Kremlin's position in this, but it's also, you can see, this is them lining up their proxies for an eventual takeover of Poland and communization of Poland, which of course is what happens after 1945-46. With those same individuals, Bolesław Bierut, of course, comes to the fore once again.
So this is, again, a really good example how you can see how the war over here in the east of Europe is so different to the war in the west. I mean, in France, we have a resistance that is very diverse politically. You have left-wingers, you have communists, you have independent patriotic groups, you have all sorts coming together, and they're brought together by people like Jean Moulin as a unified force, because there is actually more disagreement between them until 1941, when the Soviet Union joins the Allies, and then they can breach that gap. I mean, they're always got separate resistance groups, separate circuits, and they're not always in agreement on their policies, but they are fighting for the same end. They can be patriotic and communist and Frenchmen all together serving the same end, because there's never an idea that Warsaw might want to have a sphere of influence over France at this point. But in the East, of course, we have this much longer strategic game in play. And so communist Poles can be on a different side to the left wing or just central patriotic Poles. And using that word patriotic, like you said, it's such an anodyne term, it doesn't really help us much, because they could all claim to be patriots. But it just shows that in Poland, it's divided by the post-war situation is already coming into play.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can see it's very obvious that Stalin, in all of these actions, he has one eye on the post-war. He's looking to have a Poland in place post-war after the defeat of Germany, which will be a client state, which will be a communist state, which he will effectively control. And the same thing with the other countries of Central Europe. I mean, it's often dressed up as Stalin wanting to have a sort of cordon sanitaire, have a buffer zone, in case a resurgent Germany tries the same trick again as they did in 1941. But it's more than that as well. I mean, that's the sort of the eyewash for Western liberals to a large extent. But this is all to do with, Stalin expanding the power base of communism. Communism was not ever intended just to be in the Soviet Union. It's intended to be a universal creed. So it's incumbent upon communists to spread the word and to take over other countries and to subvert its enemies. So this is all part of a grand expansionist plan. It's very simple.
And that is the end of day 23. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, spread the word to all of your friends. Get everybody listening. Everybody needs to learn a little bit about the Warsaw Uprising. And we'll see you tomorrow for day 24.